Hello everyone, Wolfie of Mistforge here, bringing you the second part of my hero balancing series for the June and July patches. I delayed this video specifically for the release of Ramsey since I already knew ahead of time that he was a fighter. I will be going over patch notes for our heroes in the fighters category. Once again, I must make the disclaimer that most everything I say is based off of numbers and notations made on official patches. This is not to be a claim to say that some heroes are weak and others are strong purely from my own personal use of said heroes. Let's get into it. Taking the term offensive powerhouse and multiplying it by 10, we have Lord Gnosis. Whether you build him as an assassin or a frontline brawler, this Raging Bull will always be a fighter at his core. The first bug fix was on the Spear Time upgrade on Chuck, a tier 2 upgrade that lowers the cooldown by 3 seconds per enemy hit. Gnosis no longer has a cooldown reduction by hitting creatures that are meditating because they should not be affected by abilities if there is no ally in range. The More Gore upgrade had a bug fix where the primary target will be hit twice, effectively causing them to take double damage. Being one of his more popular upgrades nowadays, this is a pretty nice damage reduction. Bull Rush's offensive upgrade tree had one little quality of life change. The description now specifies that Mighty Yop only affects allied heroes and not friendly creatures or pets like Endor. This was something I didn't initially know because I was a long practitioner of the Major Beef upgrade until I realized how good the other side was. Then for a while I wondered why my creatures weren't getting damage boosts whenever the enemy team came for a visit. Speaking of Major Beef, in the patch that Ramsey was released, this upgrade now gives 400 temporary health instead of only 200. To accompany that, the tier 2 upgrade Thick Skinned was buffed to 200 additional health from 150, giving a grand total of 600 total temporary health instead of 350. Now 600 health is a lot of extra bulk, but you're giving up a 25% movement speed buff and trading off a 5-second 15% damage buff as well. The value of Mighty Yop for an engage followed by a good gore is so incredibly high that I simply cannot imagine ever giving it up. Not to mention the bonus focus you're generating for even more lockdown potential when you have Labyrinth ready for every other fight. At this point it might be worth trying nerfing the damage tree instead of trying to make the defensive one better. Lastly, Gnosis' focus now stuns instead of just interrupting, though I'm pretty sure it's been stunning for far longer than this patch. The notes also say that Labyrinth is now slightly more forgiving when hitting enemies below or above Gnosis' position. What this means is that the skill floor and ceiling has been reduced so that enemies should only be hit when they're in the same vertical plane. This is a nerf, but one that makes sense. What humors me most about Gnosis is that his offensive capabilities got slightly nerfed on paper, but he's actually become a much larger threat than he has been for a while. I have a video talking about why Gnosis is so strong right now, and it mostly has to deal with the stamina changes, so I'll spare you from bringing that up again. What I will bring up is the adding Assault to Injury upgrade on Skewer. This is the tier 2 upgrade from Pierce that causes bleeding when attacking a target who is already bleeding. This is one of the few degen effects in the game that stacks at 100% potency, totaling at 100 damage a second for just engaging with a sprint attack. As my good friend Rezo once put it, it's just free pure damage that you can't protect yourself from. If you cleanse the bleed, 1, that doesn't stop Gnosis' already impressive left mouse button damage, and 2, he can just reapply it because all he has to do is sprint towards you and hit you with one basic attack. Even Taito's most efficient bleed ability is put to shame by Assault to Injury. Hidden Talent only ticks for 40 a second, and it has an 8-second interior cooldown and is arguably harder to hit. Adding Assault to Injury has only a very small stamina cost and can be almost permanent if Gnosis is able to keep hitting you. Another thing I think people overlook is the Trample specialization talent. This basically doubles the range of your gore, and during Clash it reduces the cooldown if you hit someone, making what's normally a 12-second cooldown into a 5-second cooldown. That's huge for something that can be upgraded into a short-range area of effect launch. What's funny is because the specialization talent has been this way ever since that whole feature was implemented, but now it allows Gnosis to apply one of the best forms of crowd control in the game every 5 seconds for no stamina cost. He was once laughable in higher level games because of being so easy to kite, and he'd use all of his stamina before he even got the chance to start wailing on someone. Now that that's not the case, he's a real threat when paired with another melee or oftentimes even by himself. Not to say that Gnosis still has his fair share of problems and counters, but he's definitely on the stronger side. I think dropping his damage a little would be a nice start and see how he feels going from there. The end-all be-all classic bulk of a tank, Margrave has always been the most solid frontline hero in the game so far, but with a wide range of very aggressive and damaging upgrades, he can also be used as a pretty solid damage dealer. Chargeforth had a bug fix where the Supercharger specialization talent would not lower the cooldown of the ability if Margrave built into the Russian attack upgrade tree. This meant that if you hit the ability again to do the interrupting attack, you'd still have a 12-second cooldown instead of an 8-second cooldown. This does make Supercharger a little more favorable to players who want to use the Margrave for that throwback stun or Flaming Fist burn, but I still think Impact Crater will be the most favored specialization for a long time. Speaking of leap things, the Bone Crusher upgrade had a fix where the ability would sometimes weaken the enemy instead of Margrave. This bug actually never made the live client, but when I first saw it happen in core, I thought it was a change. I mean, can you imagine a 1.5 second stun that applied a 3 second 50% weakness combined with impact crater? Then again, it could possibly open people up to going that path instead of the reduced cooldown. Sadly, this probably will not be reverted. Ground and Pound's armor bonus was reduced to 15 instead of 25. Using the focus still puts Margrave at 40 armor for 5 seconds, so it's still pretty good, but in actual practice, no one's gonna just stand there and start attacking Margrave after he focuses unless he's the only person there. If you get a good 3-man or more Ground and Pound, the enemy team most likely wants to get the heck out of there before they get smacked around even more. I feel as though the bonus armor was added just because they could do it. With bonus armor being the topic, the Pound of Armor upgrade on Margrave's focus was reduced to 10 armor per enemy hit instead of 20 armor. This sounds like a big nerf, but it's really not when you draw it out. Margrave already has 25 armor, you get 5 more from the tier 1 Iron Skin, plus 15 from the base ability, and 10 per enemy you hit. Hitting just 3 people gives you 75% damage reduction for 5 seconds. But again, I can't imagine a point where Margrave would be the primary target after using his focus, when the more logical thing to do would be either to fall back or go after someone else now that his crowd control combo had been expended. This also doesn't compare to being able to have Hero's Vitality and then Stonewall. Fun fact, Stonewall was actually a passive Margrave always had innately until the Arc patch, making him the only hero who had any form of passive. The tier 2 upgrade used to be sustained abilities and was planned to be changed into Perseverance, but instead was changed to Stonewall at the last minute to keep Chris Chung's vision of Margrave being a tank who could not heal himself in any way. I feel as though Stonewall is going to need a little more playtime as being an upgrade because the higher levels still aren't sure if this made Margrave more fair or hurt him a lot more than we thought it would. All in all, I still think Margrave's in a pretty solid place. He has his strengths, he has his weaknesses. He can still do his job well despite the rise of mobility heroes, and he never feels like he's too unbearable to fight against since his animations are so telegraphed. We're still getting used to having Stonewall as an upgrade instead of a passive, but otherwise Margrave is pretty good. The giant adorable fluffball that's half group hugger and half serial murderer, Paco is a frontline fighter that just wants to have a good time. He didn't receive too many changes, but there are some other things that we can talk about. The smaller bugs include one where the camera would clip into Paco's body if the player aimed upwards. Small quality of life change to assist with those long shot snowballs. The Shattered upgrade on Snowball Toss had a bug that would give quadruple focus instead of only triple focus as the upgrade describes, and the Uninhibited upgrade on Slip and Slide now provides 25 armor instead of only 25 front armor. This helps by giving Paco some much needed bulk on top of the sustain when having to get away from a fight or to soak damage for his team. The 2 major bug fixes tie in with his focus ability. Applying the curse debuff to a target who was a snowman would permanently freeze them in place until they were killed. This would have been a much bigger problem if it hadn't been fixed before Ramsey came out, as his curse upgrade seems to be a standard for most builds. The other bug fix makes it so that enemies immune to hit reactions can no longer be turned into snowmen. This was a little bit odd to me just because I thought that if you were in range of the final breath, you'd be frozen no matter what. But the ability is coded to act like a stun, so this does make sense. But it also makes Paco's focus a lot easier to counter since it takes so long to even activate. Overall, I would say Paco is definitely stronger than he was before, but he's still a very odd pick that requires team follow-up. With the stamina overhaul, he performs better because he used to have the same problem as Gnosis did with using all his stamina just by using his abilities to start a fight. It's a lot easier to get around now, but you're still a very big target with not a lot of armor and speed when things start going badly. I think Paco's biggest problem is that his sustain can be inhibited so much because this meta seems to require at least one person in your team to run poison, and that makes Paco melt even faster than he already does. Even with a full defensive and healing build, Paco will never be able to run as the primary frontliner, and a full damage build leaves him as a one trick that's too reliant on abilities with quite long cooldowns. The strength of this hero comes from his ability to slow people down constantly, but if you miss every ability then you're kind of worthless. And I'm not saying that there should be some kind of compensation for missing a critical snowball stun, but in an evenly matched game, a smart Paco player isn't going to keep running in. They're going to run back to cover and wait for their 18-second cooldown engagement tool to come back, or otherwise they're just free focus charge and power if they keep moving forward, unless under the rare circumstance that there's a secondary backup engage. Compared to the other fighters in this game, Margrave misses Elite, but he still has his charge or deflect. Gnosis misses a Gore, but he still has very fast speed and powerful basic attacks. I'd like for Paco to have something he can do in case he doesn't hit the snowball aside from spitting cold ice in the enemy's general direction. The only people Paco is a true threat to is assassins because they can't afford to stay in all his freeze abilities or they'll get jumped on. He can counter people with a lot of ground most mobility like Trip and Ramsey, but even those strengths are overpowered by heroes like Beckett or HK or even a good Wu because they do more damage than he can afford to take. But by no means is Paco a weak hero, he's just only good enough to be in a specific type of team comp that favors him, and that's not a bad thing at all. I think it's a good idea to have heroes that can only perform their best under certain factors and conditions instead of flexible picks that can run on every map with every type of team composition. I only think it's bad that there's no way to tell what's on the enemy team right now, so it's kind of hard to run Paco blind because he's too easy to deal with. Boy, I can't wait to talk about this one. Ramsey is the newest addition to the roster, a cocky and brash frontline fighter who specializes in mobility and evading attacks. He doesn't have a ton of upfront damage, but he will chip you away if you ignore him. Ramsey hasn't been changed since his release, so there aren't many bugs to report of just yet. So instead, we'll just talk about his kit and playstyle. In a news article on GoGigantic.com, developers said that his design was an attempt to push the boundaries of what an agile tank could be. Someone who was durable through the act of avoiding strong enemy attacks instead of relying on things like health or high armor. Rush acts like a free dodge that damages enemies he passes through. With such a short cooldown, this can be used alternatively with regular dodges to avoid damage with iframes, and this makes Ramsey capable of dodging forward and even diagonally. Another thing Ramsey can claim over other melee heroes is that his dodge attacks have a much longer reach because of his extendable weapon. In combination with Flurry, he is able to damage people from melee or short range consistently. Juju Fruit and Fruit Punch both apply a poison debuff with relative ease. The poison damage is actually incredibly strong at 50 a tick, and Fruit Punch also provides an enormous stealth field for your allies, and it's probably the best zoning tool in the entire game next to Charnok's Hot Hail or Griselma's Focus. The big thing that players seem to be struggling with is Ramsey's dodge build. This build involves the upgrades Lash Out on left mouse button, bouncing around and counterplay on right mouse button, endurance and acrobatics on his focus, and the adrenaline specialization talent. All of this makes Ramsey capable of performing at least 7 dodges before expending all of his stamina, the ability to use Rush to deal solid damage with an interrupt every 2 seconds, and gain 10 stamina back with every rush, and gain virtually permanent 100% crit chance during the clash. This build is incredibly strong because a smart Ramsey player will almost never get hit by anything, but the biggest issue is the fact that you can still deal good damage if the enemy decides to ignore you. And if your team follows you in, the enemy has to decide to either focus you down or go for your teammates. The logic though is that one way or another your team will win because someone's always dealing damage. Ramsey avoids everything and the team cleans up, or the enemy goes after your backline while Ramsey shreds theirs. It feels like a lose-lose situation. The best way to counter this is to try to time your crowd control abilities for in-between dodges. Ramsey does not have iframes at the end of his dodge, so that's the best time to do it. Paco, Zenobia, and Wu are all good counters, but only if someone else provides the damage. It's also a good idea to have someone who can cleanse allies like Sven or Vadasi so that Ramsey's poison doesn't drain everybody. Another one of Ramsey's greatest strengths is the multiple ways he can be built. He boasts several upgrades that can be used to fight different types of enemies and can be used in either offensive or defensive ways, much like Zenobia. He's also one of the only heroes whom all 3 specialization talents are viable. Although he can't perform most roles like Ashlyn or Voden can, he can perform exceptionally well at the roles that he can perform, be it fighter, assassin, or evade tank. I believe that Motiga will nerf him because he's definitely strong, but he's not nearly as powerful as most seem to think he is. It's just a matter of learning how to play with and against a new hero. And last but not least, the Star Guardian herself with her mighty lance and mass utility auras, Endor is a frontline fighter that can flex into a couple of varieties. A few people commented that I didn't place her into the support category. Well, even though she has a lot of utility and can be used in a support role, the bottom line is that she's meant to be a frontliner to accompany melee heroes. As far as bug fixes goes, Endor only got a few, but they are pretty big. A bug was fixed where she was able to rapidly spam her primary attack by cancelling any aura. I never quite figured out how to perform this bug, but it did allow her to deal upwards of 1200 damage under 2 seconds per ability, so that's a little ridiculous. There was also a bug fix where the Lancing Blow upgrade on Aura of Strength would allow her to gain the aura effects without actually using the ability. This meant that Zendora was able to use her Quick and Fluid basic attack that hits pretty hard and has a slightly longer range than other melee heroes, while also providing nearby allies with bonus damage for free, which could be used pretty easily because you'd be able to do it all the time. The Battle Armor upgrade on Aura of Life also now works with the left mouse button beam upgrade, which assists players who prefer to use Endor as a more midline support with stronger auras for your damage dealers. Zendora is really hard to talk about balance-wise if I'm gonna be honest. Of all the heroes in the game so far, she definitely has the strangest kit. She's meant to be a tank, but she is relatively low health and has no form of hard crowd control and limited mobility. Her utility is very high, but she can't be run as a solo support or frontliner because her healing is relatively weak and she has no peel. A lot of players don't understand what she's supposed to do, and it seems like a majority of the top tier players think that she's okay but very situational and her focus is her saving grace. It feels like when a team chooses Endor, it's because they want to, not because they need her to counter something specific. And she doesn't exactly have the best upgrades either. Bluster's Boon is a noob trap because it hardly provides any focus and it doesn't build into anything worthwhile at tier 2, and Rainbow Dash is fun and all, but the speed boost has high team value, so you'll hardly ever use it. She doesn't need any kind of change in numbers except for maybe health, but mostly just to revisit to her upgrade options to something more original. I mean, come on, do we really need a conversion upgrade on every aura? But that'll bring this video to a close. Leave comments below about what you think of the fighter heroes right now and how you think they could be balanced. Do you think any of them are too strong? How about too weak? Also be sure to subscribe to the channel so you're the first to know when there's new content. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and we'll see you on the airship.